I took a particular interest in shipping and shipping emissions, partly because obviously we've got Felixstowe in the east of England, and it's a kind of really important part of British life because we're an island. So hopefully we will get onto that. But aviation, of course, is particularly affected by the lockdown. So has also very interesting things. Without more ado, I'm going to share my screen. Right, this is it. That's just the heading. So aviation has been going up and up, past 1 million passengers in the EU in 2017. And the UK is particularly highly implicated in this. It has more air passengers departing from UK airports than any other EU country. And the turnover is huge. Here I'm trying to avoid billions because billions are ambiguous. I've written it out as 145,976 million. I think a bit later in the presentation there are some billions, and I don't know whether they're millions or 100,000 millions. But anyway, so it's a huge amount, and as a result, the UK accounts for 25% of the aviation emissions in the EU, and Heathrow is the busiest airport in the EU. I mean, all these, of course, are figures from 2017, 2018, so they count us as EU, but it's really, we need some comparator, and here we are, the busiest EU airport, 78 million passengers. And here's what happened during lockdown, probably about 80% cut to aviation, and Heathrow down 97%. So a massive cut in the aviation in particular. So if you look at the skies, you see no vapor trails, and there's no disturbance apart from here we get the occasional flight, which is perhaps a cargo flight, and the helicopter that comes over from the hospital, the air ambulance, but basically we're undisturbed by aeroplanes. So we've had clear skies like that occasion when the Iceland volcano erupted. And what this shows us is that we can, if we wish, if we need, get rid of planes from the sky. But are we going to have them back? There are a lot of people who want to see planes coming back. So here are some of the people who are really interested in trying to get it all back. The airlines, they are losing money and potentially folding. There are those with the jobs in the sector. They might prefer to be furloughed, but they'd rather have a job than no job and no furlough pay either. The government wants to end furlough and restore revenues, so they want the airlines to be back and flourishing again. There are the people who make their money from foreign tourism who want people to be able to come in by air, and obviously elsewhere, similarly, in the destinations that our people would normally go to. There are the visitor attractions, there are the accommodation, and so on. And then there are the people who have second homes or people who've got family in Europe and further away. They want to be able to go and visit. And then there are the people who think that the only way to go on holiday is by air. So all these people are pressing us to go back as quickly as possible to having cheap flights. So what's been happening so far since the March lockdown? Well, there have been bailouts from the government. So airlines, car makers, oil engineers have all been beneficiaries of UK bailouts, which are designed to keep businesses afloat during a time when they're not getting any income, in the expectation that they will subsequently get some income. So they're expecting to hand out up to 67 million. That doesn't add up, because it now says that these airlines have had 1.8 billion. So maybe that was 67 billion. Anyway, the precise numbers are not important. The question is, should these airlines be being propped up by a scheme? Should it have some conditions? So technically these things are, I gather, loans, and they could therefore have some climate conditions put in to require that, to keep the loan and not have to repay it immediately, they have to make some changes, or that they can get different rates depending on what they do. But basically, it's been given unconditionally at the moment. So what else has happened? The airlines have laid off large proportions of their staff, not just furloughed them, but actually laid them off in the expectation that things will not pick up for a long time. So British Airways lost 12,000 staff, and Swissport, yesterday we heard 4,500 airport staff, which is half its workers, have been laid off completely. Their jobs ended. And that's because they're expecting low volume till 2024. So that's the crucial thing. You'll note that thing. Oh, they expect low volume till 2024. So what are we going to do about that? Then there are some other implications of the lockdown. So you know that pilots and other staff have to have got recent experience of flying, or they get disqualified. So the recency rules mean that some staff who haven't flown for a long time would then be disqualified and would need to restore their qualifications for flying. And then there's the question about the planes, which have been grounded for a long time. So the cancelled orders for new planes, they're not going to want any new planes for a very long time. So that's a knock-on for engineering companies, which would have depended upon orders for planes. And then maintenance has been on hold as well. So there may be maintenance that needs to be done before they can be used again. And we've seen pressure from the airline to ease distancing rules and cancel quarantine requirements because they want to be able to fill up their planes, and they want to be able to bring people back and forth in short turnaround times. They don't want people to have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So then what will happen? What's going to be the next stage? We should maybe start trying to predict. Well, it's not difficult to predict. So we can already see that the low-cost carriers are really keen to get the holiday flights up and running, and many of them are starting either from late June or early July. I think EasyJet, we're talking of running them with middle seats vacant, but others are expecting to fill their flights. Ryanair seem to think that they will just fill them up with no social distancing at all. Masks, yes, but space, no. And given that the seats are only 50 centimetres wide, even if you leave a seat in the middle of the row between the window seat and the aisle seat, that's not a metre apart. So it seems as if they're just taking the 1 metre plus advice as advice, and it's very interesting that the government has said it's only advice and not legislation now. So they're kind of, obviously they're trying to make it possible for airlines, among other things, to pack people in close if they want to. And Ryanair hopes to run 40% of its normal number of flights by filling them up fully and trying to make them pay. So there are two options for them. They could raise prices to try to cover the costs of a lower volume of traffic. Prices should rise because it's more expensive to run flights with fewer people and more expensive to have planes on the ground not being used and so on. Or they can cut prices to stimulate demand. And it seems likely that what they're going to try to do is the latter. Push really, really cheap prices so that while people are afraid and reluctant, they will be tempted by deals that are irresistible. And in particular, you'll see cheap deals on bookings for way ahead next winter, for example, to try to get the cash flow, get people to book on flights that may or may not happen. Perhaps with clauses that say, no refunds if it doesn't happen, if it's COVID related. I mean, one interesting thing is that it appears that travel insurance companies are not going to cover COVID related claims. So if you take a flight, you're going to be taking risks both on health, death while you're overseas, and cancellation of your accommodation or quarantine, if you get delayed by quarantine or closure of a place. So my prediction is that just as we saw a load of people trapped on cruise ships and on the other side of the world when everything locked down, we shall have a repeat of that in the summer or the autumn when we start to see sudden spikes. Everybody will get trapped again. So it looks as though what's going to happen is that the airlines are going to try to get as many people as possible to travel to as many different places as possible for as little money as possible to try and stimulate it back up to normal. And now, obviously, if you leave the market to stabilize with a much reduced demand, then if you get a combination of low prices and low demand, then some of the airlines will evidently go out of business. I mean, all of them will struggle, and then some of them will manage to survive. Those that fail first, their slack will be picked up by the others, but there'll then be a lack of competition and they can push the prices up. If there's some demand, of course, it's not clear how high the demand will go. Rather depends, I guess, on lost it now. Rather depends on what happens and whether people are afraid or not. So, what about the governments? What are the governments doing? So there's a real risk that the government will add further economic assistance to try to save the airlines and keep prices down, to try to stimulate a gradual recovery to the 2019 levels of demand, and then with growth. But that's a really unattractive situation from our point of view, because before lockdown, global airline emissions were rising. We're pretty used to exponential graphs now, but they were like the coronavirus graphs. They are shooting up, and they've risen 70% faster than predicted over the period 2013 to 18. And that was equivalent to building 50 coal-fired power plants. So basically, this is a really destructive growth area, and it doesn't stop growing. We've got this agreement that was that is called CORSIA, which is an international agreement that was designed to curb growth and also minimize its effect on the environment, whereby the airlines that had agreed to take part in it were going to offset any growth in emissions. So they were taking as their baseline level the period 2019 to 20. And then they were going to make any growth above the 2019 to 20 levels carbon neutral, so-called, by offsetting. It's kind of greenwashing, but they were supposed to be using 2019 to 20 levels. Now, of course, 2020 is going to be vastly reduced because we've got this period where there's virtually 80% cut. And if you actually put that in an average 2019-20 levels, which is what they'd agreed to do, we would be way back into, the 1960s in terms of your baseline. And if they had to offset everything that went up, that was above what's effectively 1960s level, then they would be having to pay effectively a huge tax on virtually 80%, pretty well the whole of what they were doing. Lost it again. So the airlines are resisting that. Obviously, they don't want to have to pay on everything that's over the 2020 level or even the average of 2019 and 20. So they want the baseline to be revised so that it says just anything that is above 2019. And then, of course, they'd have a free period when they didn't have to pay any taxation or offsetting, because they would still be below the 2019 level, and effectively they wouldn't be offsetting anything. So this graph I find very distressing, because you'll see here every recession that we've had that cuts aviation growth. I mean, it doesn't cut aviation, but it cuts the growth in aviation each time there's some recession. You'll see the 9/11 event, the Gulf War and SARS. You get a little bit of a dip then, but each of these red lines that you can see on the thing, it is an additional billion annual passengers. So, and you'll see that the billions are coming faster and faster and faster, and this is what I mean by an exponential growth. Does this, we're not actually seeing the whole of this graph. Wait a minute. Can't see the years at the bottom, unfortunately. I don't know why the picture's not showing. Anyway, so basically what's happening is that in a shorter and shorter period, we are multiplying the number of passengers. And although, you can make efficiency savings of minor sorts on new planes, they're always vastly exceeded by the increase in air passengers. So when they say, oh, we want to be back to normal by 2024, they mean we want to be back onto that curve, right? We want to be heading up at the rate that we were heading up before, and they want to be doing that by 2024. So they want one of those little dips. They realize that they're going to have a little dip, but they're aiming to stimulate demand in such a way that they'll be back onto this exponential curve by 2024, and then it will just carry on, right? So unless we can get ourselves another epidemic, we're doomed. So it seems to me that there's a lot wrong with what's happening at the moment in the government's response. There's an obsession with getting things back up and running without checking whether not doing so would actually improve our lives and make things better. So we're actually missing an opportunity to rethink, and we should, instead of saying build back better, which rather implies we want to build back the same old things, but we want them better. There are some things where we should be saying there's no going back to that. That was actually a really bad idea. Seems that a complete failure to recognise the level of threat posed by this constant growth in air travel. No matter how much it's greenwashed, it's utterly irresponsible to allow that kind of level of growth, or any growth at all, in fact. Why not just plateau? We're seeing pursuit of jobs and job retention, even in places where jobs are working to make the planet uninhabitable and sustaining unsustainable demand for quick travel. So, the idea that a job is good, it shouldn't be, you can't assume that, because some jobs are actually really catastrophically awful. And nobody ought to be in those jobs. They should be in other jobs if we want them to be in jobs, or if they want to be in jobs, there are plenty of good jobs that they could be in. They don't have to be in jobs that are so destructive. And people are not asking whether the job that they're doing is actually a job that should be being done. They're assuming that targets they've been set are targets that they should aim to achieve, and that success is being good at their job, regardless of whether their job is actually a good job to be doing. So the government should stop thinking that a job is a good thing, it seems to me, and start thinking not only about which jobs are a good thing, not all jobs are a good thing. Jobs in the drug industry, for example, illegal drugs, they're jobs in a sort of way, they make money, but they're not a good thing. So we need to start thinking about whether the jobs are good, but we also need to start thinking that leisure, including having enough time to travel slowly and to enjoy unspoilt nature, those things are actually maybe more important for people than having a job. So one of the things that lockdown has shown, I think, is the beneficial effects of active travel, of time at home, of clean air. And we've seen reductions in the use of the GP and A&E. And of course, they worry about whether the reductions in the use of GP and A&E is because people are ill but not going. But there's another possible explanation, which is that people are actually less ill because they're less pressured. They've been furloughed. They're actually having the time at home that they needed to get their lives sorted out. It's not true for everybody, of course, and we have to remember that there are people for whom being at home is absolutely terrible, but for many people, it's really great. So we need to stop thinking that social security systems should make work obligatory and finding a job really the be-all and end-all of it. We need shorter working weeks, we need longer holidays. And we should reckon that the acceptable should be in activities that are helping, not hindering, the carbon neutrality ambitions. So offsetting shouldn't count as greening. We should be aiming to actually do real things that that cut the emissions instead of just trying to pretend that they don't count. So it seems to me that our ambition should be to make air travel rather unusual, not a rare thing. We should be outlawing domestic flights where there's no sea to cross. We should be taxing frequent flyers. We should be making second homes abroad hard to afford. And we should be subsidising things like Eurostar and the night trains that give us alternatives.
Hey, Catherine, I think we're going to have to move on to the questions at this point.
Yes, I'm sorry. So I think I'll do the shipping on another occasion.
Okay. So just, it was really interesting hearing the business case about aviation, because you often think simply let's just stop it all, but actually, as you said, there's a lot of big implications to this. My question is, if in February this year, Friends of the Earth won a case in the British courts to stop a runway being built in Heathrow. I think that was the result, and their case was premised on the fact that by building an extra and expanding Heathrow's capacity would affect our ability to hit the COP21 goals. So I'm just wondering if you think that has set a precedent to help us prevent further expansion of the of airport capacities across the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been some good news on trying to prevent expansion of airport capacity in the UK. That's obviously going to make it harder for the airlines just to expand indefinitely using the existing facilities. I guess that I'm thinking more globally that there might be problems with other airports that are allowed to expand in Europe and so on. But I guess it's true that there might be a plateau beyond which the UK can't keep. You know, Heathrow is already 25% of the European traffic. Maybe it can't go higher than that, but that doesn't stop European traffic in the other parts. I mean, maybe the EU will manage to get its act together and stop at least domestic flights where there are rail links in Europe. But I can't see cutting the current quantity very easily happening.
Thank you very much.
I don't know whether that's an answer, but
I'm going to pass on to Nicola, who's got a few questions from the chat to share.